All right, so here's something I'm going to talk about that I haven't talked about, which changes the whole game. And I know it's true, but I don't know any numbers for sure. And so I hate talking about it, but we're going to talk about it. So they had 3.7 billion shares. They reverse split it to 150 million. They have another 1.8 billion of dilution. We get announced at the new record date for the new dilution or new reverse split vote, that it was at 650 million shares, which brings them down to 1.3 billion shares. And then we know there's been over 10 to 15 billion shares traded since then, since that record date. So if we take the 4% from there, we can assume like 800 million or so. So if we take that 800 million from the 1.3 billion, that leaves 500 million shares. That's probably a safe assumption. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be accurate, but here's the good news. And here's the news that we haven't really discussed in my videos in the last day. When AMC squoze, you got to understand that the squeeze actually started back in like January of 2020. And even though we didn't hear about it until January of 2021, the reason is because they were diluting that whole time. So it was going from $1.80 up to $7, down to $3, up to $8, down to $5, and just playing this bull crap game. And slowly they were announcing 50 million shares of dilution here and then here. And then by the time January 2021 hit, there was probably 200 million shares of dilution. And then the January 2021 squeeze happened where it ran from $4 to $20 all in 3 days. And they announced like $1.2 billion that AMC raised. And then obviously the next 3 months they raised another $2 or $3 billion. But the point that I'm getting at is Mullen is such a unique situation because when I was pumping it back in 2022, I kind of felt like I might be wrong about the stock price temporarily, and I might like miss the squeeze, or I might have to get a little more money for a squeeze later. Because in my head, I was thinking, well, if I can convince retail to give them $1.5 billion, Mullen's going to get 700 million of that. That was the logic in my head, and I was wrong about that. And so all the money went to the insiders, and Mullen basically just only got the loan money outside of any money they were able to sell themselves that they personally owned. But even that was very small in comparison to what the big banks did that were loaning Mullen the money for the shares. And so what I'm getting at is if we know they have 500 million shares left, right now, if they did the $25 million buyback at, let's just say, 10 cents a share, that's 250 million shares. So there's no one that can convince me that they're not doing the buyback before the reverse split. Like, I feel like the buyback's probably already happened. Like, that's just how they do things. Like, you could buy the 250 million shares, and if the other guys dilute all of their 250 million and only have 250 million left, like, they can make the price not move. Like, that's how dilution works. No matter how much David buys, unless he buys all of it and then a little bit more, like, it doesn't guarantee that the squeeze is going to start. But here's the thing. Why the fuck should I assume of these last possible 500 million shares that Mullen Automotive doesn't own a single one? Now, again, we can look at the buyback and we can say, okay, Mullen Automotive owns half of them. So if they own 250 million shares, then that means their insiders are only left with 250 million shares. And that's assuming Mullen didn't own any of the 500 million to begin with. And if they only own 250 million shares, and the remaining outstanding shares currently today would be roughly, what would it be? It'd be 1.6 billion plus the 150 million. So we'd be right at 2 billion. So if they do a 9-to-1 reverse split, we do 2 billion divided by 9, and we'd have 222 million shares. So if we have 220 million shares and they have 250 million shares, plus what David owns and all the insiders own that aren't counted towards the outstanding shares, like, any way I do this math in my head, like, realistically, like, obviously if they're trying to screw us, if David was working against us, all these different things, then nobody really knows what's going to happen, because, like, maybe he doesn't do the buyback. Maybe he leaves them the 500 million shares. Maybe they have another dilution vote and they screw us all over again. Like, all that, it's technically possible, but with what's been said and what's happening, like, it seems highly unlikely. And the more I think about it, the more I think that, like, even if they decide to dilute for the next 30 days and get rid of all the shares that they have, Mullen's going to get a fat stack of that money. And yeah, like, that's the one difference. Is back in July 22, when I thought Mullen was going to squeeze, I thought if they didn't squeeze, they were going to raise a ton of capital. And, like, if their market cap is at 100 million, but they literally have 700 million in the bank, and they can literally go build the best, like, whatever they want to build, like, and just start and not worry about the money. Like, all of that was in my head, to where even if the squeeze failed in my timeline, I thought the win was very guaranteed, like, shortly after. But we didn't get the money, and so it wasn't. And then the rest of the story continued. And yeah, all I'm saying is, this time when dilution happens, as the price is going up, there will be announcements that Mullen has raised money on it, and we should be happy about that, because anytime Mullen raises cash to drop the stock price, it's guaranteed the stock price will go higher. Now, if cash is being raised but it's not going to Mullen and then it drops the stock price, well, if they have more ability to raise cash through dilution, then there's no saying that the stock price won't continue to go down. But as long as we're raising cash in the process, then long term, you're secure. And so that should be one of the big things you're looking for. We're definitely looking for an outstanding share update. If we get an 8K or a 10Q that gives us those answers, these videos might become a lot more entertaining, just because they'll have real data to go off of, rather than trying to assume what's happened in the last 50 trading days, because we just have no data based on 50 trading days. And that's another thing that bothers me, and it's definitely from the market makers. It's not a Mullen thing. Like, Mullen's been trapped in this where they give data 3 months after stuff happens every single time. And with AMC, when it was happening, they always announced their dilution within 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks of diluting, and sometimes it was within 3 days of finishing their diluting. Like, they started diluting here, they finished it in 2 weeks, and after they finished it, 3 days later, they announced all that dilution. Well, Mullen will go 3 months and then only announce 2 months and leave the last 30 days blank, so you still don't know the full data. And it's not Mullen, it's not David, it's the market makers, it's the lawyers. But, like, if you do end up going to a lawsuit, one of the best lawsuits you have against the market makers, like for Mullen, like, you might have to go through Mullen to get to the market makers, but the whole idea is that all of this information that I use to trade stocks used to be readily available and considered due diligence and considered necessary for a company to provide, so that investors could have proper knowledge of what they're investing into. Like, you're not supposed to be gambling on stocks. Stocks are supposed to be releasing all their information and you reading through it and deciding which stock is the best for you. And so they changed the rules so that retail investors are less powerful and don't know real market caps, don't know real dilution, don't know real outstanding shares, don't know real potential remaining dilution shares. All of this stuff is just left in the void. And we're left, like, just looking at the volume, trying to come up with some type of mathematical reference of where we might be. And all of that was supposed to be illegal, and it was illegal until 2022, after we whooped their ass in AMC. and they just so scared to get their ass whooped one more time. Like, they're just so scared of it. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know who's going to get famous. They don't know what's going to happen on the next stock squeeze, how many more people are going to be ready for it. Like, they just don't want to deal with this no more, and you guys made it to where they have to. So screw us, pay us. I don't think it matters at this point. I think the story is, like, there's just too many people that have seen exactly what's happening, that whether it takes a year or a day or a fucking decade, the story's gonna get out, and there's no chance that retail looks like the bad guy, I look like the bad guy, David looks like the bad guy, or Mullen looks like the bad guy. It's 100% the lawyers, the money loaners, and the market makers, and the politicians, of course. It's crazy.